Welcome to another episode of the Taiwanology podcast. This is your host, Kwangyin from CommonWealth magazine in Taiwan. Have you ever tried riding a pilotless aircraft or being a passenger in an autonomous car? My colleagues did just that a few weeks ago. And it wasn't in San Francisco or Phoenix, Arizona. They did it in Shenzhen and Hangzhou in China. Today, we're going to explore the most recent CommonWealth cover story that has enormous implications for the global technology landscape. China's technological advancements, despite ongoing sanctions and international pressure. China's Made in China 2025 initiative. Many of you might have heard of this strategic plan raised nearly 10 years ago. Aim to transform China into a global leader in high-tech industries. However, what's fascinating is how, despite the widespread sanctions and restrictions imposed by Western countries, especially the US, China has continued to make remarkable strides in everything from AI to robotics and even autonomous flying cars. Today, I'm honored to be joined by my colleague Yixuan Lin. She is one of the co-authors of a recent in-depth article that sheds light on how China is not just weathering these sanctions, but in some cases, using them to fuel its own innovations. We're going to unpack how China's tech ecosystem is evolving and what that means for the future. And also, what are the challenges that lie ahead of this Chinese ambition? Without further ado, let us welcome our special guest today, Yixuan. Welcome back to the studio.
Hello, Kwangyin. Thank you for having me here.
Good. I remember last time we were talking about your trip to Kumamoto, Japan.
Oh, yeah.
It's more than half a year ago. So this time you went to China, and let's hear all about it. But first, what was that?
Pretty cool, right? This is a driverless electric flying car from Shenzhen, and two people can sit in it. And you can hear the strong wind in the background, partly due to the takeoff and partly because of the typhoon.
Oh, there's a typhoon.
Yeah, unfortunately, even though we were hoping to try it out, the weather condition led to the ride being canceled.
Oh, okay. But it still took flight, a test flight.
Yes, and we saw how easily it to take off and land, and it seems like it could be a very unique mode to transportation.
So how does a flying car work? Is it more like a helicopter, or it could also drive on the street?
More like a helicopter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's more like an aircraft than a car.
But it's for in the future for everyone. You don't need airplane license to drive it. In the future.
Doesn't sound very safe. But I think what's unique is that this is happening in China. Is this allowed in the US or anywhere else?
No, I believe that China will be the first country in the world to make it happen.
Okay, right. So maybe you'll be one of the first passengers to ride in those eVTOLs. Mm-hmm. Right, so that was the eVTOL, the flying car. And I read the story. You also wrote about an autonomous car.
Yeah.
Did you try it? What was it like?
Yeah, we did have a chance to drive Huawei's autonomous car in Hangzhou.
Okay.
I've driven a Tesla before, and compared to that, Huawei's self-driving style is much more aggressive.
Oh.
For example, if the car in front reacts a bit slowly at a green light, Huawei's car would quickly overtake it. And something I've never seen in a Tesla.
Okay, so this is more like an Asian driver than an American driver.
Yeah, the style is different.
Okay. Right. So besides that, what was the experience like? Did you feel safe in the car?
I know I say it's more aggressive, but it still follow the road law. It's also based on big data. And I believe it's safe in most of the time, but we can't say that it's 100% safe.
Right. So your experience with Huawei's driverless car. Is it already available on the market? Can a Chinese consumer buy it?
Yes, and I believe that autonomous cars are very popular now in China.
Really? Okay. So a regular person like you or me can just buy it and use the driverless function.
Yeah.
So is this available now in Taiwan? I mean, this kind of system, not Huawei car.
I believe that Tesla can do something like autonomous driving, but I have to check the law. It's different.
Yeah. People are saying that it's not legal, but it's legal in China.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the car is driving and you're sleeping. It's not allowed.
No. Okay, so it's not really hands-free. You have to keep your hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the point of a driverless car? What's the point?
Yeah, I believe it's not, you don't have to 100% focus on the driving thing.
Right. I see. I remember somebody told me because now the steering wheels of these cars, they have a special system. The car could only go if you keep your hands on the steering wheel. So people are selling fake hands that are heavy. So the steering wheel would think that your hands are on the wheel.
Yeah, and
you will keep driving.
Yeah, but I believe Taiwan's Tesla driver also use this.
Right. So we don't want to spill their secrets. Right, so we talked about the flying cars and the driverless cars. There was something else you saw. There was a very fascinating exhibition. You went to Beijing for the World Robot Conference. What was that like?
Oh, it's incredibly diverse. It's almost like a sci-fi thing.
Oh.
There are so many different kinds of robots, from the one look very human and to those used in factories, households. So they were cooking and squeezing juice, and even for healthcare, just to name a few.
Okay, so these are humanoids or are they just robotic arms?
Both.
Okay, both. And my favorite kind of robot is those from the film Interstellar. Very intelligent robots that don't look human at all. They look more like Rubik cubes, but they are very intelligent and they can keep people alive. So this really sounds very futuristic. When do you expect them to hit the market?
We asked the experts, and they believe that eventually these robots will become helpers in every household. And it will likely take around 10 more years before robots transition from factories to homes, because they need more data, more things to train the robots.
Right. But you told me that there are a few customers who are already very interested in having some robots at home. Can you tell me about them?
Yeah, some old lady want to bring a robot with them home immediately because they may need some helper. Maybe their spouse need to...
They have to take care of elderly people at their homes?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Right. Or maybe the robots can clean the house for them?
Yeah, I believe everyone want one in their own house.
Okay. So these are all very futuristic scenes. But as we talked about in the introduction, there was an initiative called Made in China 2025. And that is why you went to China this time with a few coworkers. Could you tell us what this initiative was about?
This policy in China was rolled out about a decade ago, and the government brought together hundreds of experts to figure out key industries and the technologies needed for development. And their goal was to make China a manufacturing powerhouse within 10 years.
Right. So these robots and autonomous cars, I think it's all part of the Made in China 2025 ambition that I have mentioned before. This strategy has been talked about a lot, but for those who don't know, could you explain what this initiative was and why did China want to do this?
The policy in China was rolled out about a decade ago.
So in 2015.
Yeah, and the government brought together hundreds of experts to figure out key industry and the technology needed for development. And their goal was to make China a manufacturing powerhouse within 10 years. And why they do this? Partly because they don't want And if in the future there a war or something, a trade war, something like that, they don't want to rely on other countries too much.
Right, right. Rely on other countries for what, for example?
Chip is a very important thing.
Okay. And what else? Like technology, all kinds of technology?
Yeah, we mentioned about robots and something like AI.
Right, right. Yeah, because I find this Made in China 2025 very interesting is because China has been a manufacturing powerhouse for decades. But this Made in China 2025 ambition seems a step forward. They want to be more independent. They no longer have to rely on, for example, the US, Germany, Japan for cutting edge technology. And it looks like it has done just that in many fields, right?
Yeah, a study from Hong Kong shows that around 86% of the goals that have been achieved so far.
86%, that's pretty high.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. The
Okay.
electric vehicle industry has fully achieved import substitution, with Chinese companies controls the entire supply chain.
Meaning they don't have to import any parts
Yeah,
for EVs anymore.
Yeah, from upstream materials to battery and cars. And last year, over 10 million vehicles were sold, far exceeding the original target of 3 million.
So more than 3 times the goal.
Yeah. Another area that let's talk about is China's commercial aircraft sector.
Commercial aircraft,
Yeah.
like the Boeing and Airbus.
Yeah. So far, 11 Chinese-made planes have been delivered. And during this interview trip, we even flew on a Chinese-made plane from Shanghai to Beijing.
How was that like?
Overall, it looked very similar to the Airbus A320,
Okay.
and both inside and out. But the one major area that's still lagging behind is chip manufacturing, which will be a big challenge for China's future manufacturing efforts.
Right. The chips, the semiconductor chips that are very essential for all of our computers and smartphones. But China is doing well in most kind of chips, right? The mature node. But so you're talking about the advanced nodes that they're lagging behind.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think that would be a nice segue for our next question. I think most people would have questions because ever since 2018, there's been, people call it the US-China trade war, that there's a lot of tech sanctions imposed by US on China. They cannot import some very advanced GPUs or other equipment. How has China been able to work around these challenges and thrive?
Many new startups in China, like Xinqiong and Biren Technology, and they are focusing on hybrid car training, which combines domestic and NVIDIA chips, as they are prepared for a future without relying on NVIDIA.
Oh, okay. And have they been successful?
So far, they sound doing great. And additionally, Samsung chip architecture companies like ARM are based in the US. China is actively developing open source architectures like RISC-V to try and bypass US restriction.
I see. So they've come up with their alternative way of developing their technology without relying on the rules set by the US, so to speak. Right. So it looks like China really has a lot of ways to get around these sanctions. And we know that Yixuan also had paid a visit to a compound, very important compound that belongs to Huawei. We'll come back to that after the break. Welcome back to Taiwanology. This is your host, Kwangyin. In our studio today is Lin Yixuan. She is the senior reporter of CommonWealth magazine. She is here to share with us her trip and observations from China. So we were just talking about Huawei before the pause and how China has bypassed a lot of sanctions imposed by Western countries. And I believe you and our colleagues, you went to a very special compound that belongs to Huawei. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we went to Lianqiuhu Park. It's in Shanghai's outskirts, and it's Huawei's very important
Research and Development Center?
Yes, yeah.
How big was it? It's like a university or a city?
It's like a little country. Can you say this?
Little country. Okay, so that's big. What's in this compound?
I think it's very cool because inside there is a shuttle train for the workers in there. You can take a train to go to your building.
Okay, interesting.
Inside the park, there is a very important laboratory, and its name is very cool. It's named 2012.
2012. What does it mean?
The inspiration for this lab came from the Maya prophecy about the end of the world.
Oh, okay.
And the Huawei's founder, Ren Zhengfei, he believed that to survive, they needed to build their own Noah's Ark, and which means it is to prepare the situation that if no one and no other country, no other company will help, they have to rely on themselves.
Right. So the name 2012 is like a reminder for Huawei's employees that we have to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, and this is to give them a sense of urgency.
Yes. And as a result, this lab has developed many key products like the chips and a replacement for Oracle's ERP system.
Okay, so they are replacing Oracle.
Yeah.
And how about the chips? Can you tell us about the chips?
The chips is for AI. And because of the chip restriction, they can't have enough NVIDIA chip.
Because the US has imposed restriction. So I think it was from last year that China can no longer import legally the most advanced NVIDIA GPUs, the graphic processing units from the US.
Yeah, so Huawei built up their own AI chips, and although there are just few chips because they can process in many
so
for everyone.
The supply is very limited.
Yes,
right.
But they said it's compatible to NVIDIA.
So it looks like Huawei is really on the way to developing AI chips that are comparable to NVIDIA and maybe one day replace NVIDIA.
I can say replace, but I can say that Huawei want to do many things. In the past, they say that Huawei is China's Samsung. But nowadays, Huawei has become China's version of Apple plus Ericsson plus Microsoft plus Intel, Oracle, and NVIDIA. They do all of the things.
Right. So Huawei is becoming an everything company.
Yeah.
Okay. But Huawei is just becoming a big monster. And what do the Chinese companies and people think about Huawei's future?
We asked a former IBM executive, and he believes this is a special phenomenon for a special time. And he doesn't think it will last long and predicts that the company will eventually be split into several smaller ones.
So what is the special time? Why is now a special time?
I believe he means the trade war between China and Western world, because China needs a company like this to push its technology forward.
I see. So it was because of these sanctions and external pressure that Huawei is kind of shouldering the responsibility to be the hope of China.
Yeah, it seems like that.
Right. So it sounds pretty nationalistic. So I think it's very interesting to be watching their development in the future. And also from your reporting, it looks like there are a lot of new startups. For example, the Gen Z from Tsinghua universities, they have a lot of very successful startups. And looking ahead, do you think China's tech sector has a bright future, or are there big challenges?
we have to look at this from a long-term perspective. We all know that today's mantra is computing power is national power. But with the current chip restriction, China will have to pour more money, more technology, more talent into catching up with the US. And this is going to turn into a battle of resource consumption. And by 2025, we might not see a huge difference. But if we extend the timeline to like 2035, the real question is whether China has enough resources to keep burning until then. And that's something to keep an eye on.
Right, especially now the Chinese economy is not doing so well.
Yeah.
Right, so that I think that's a concern, like for how much longer can China squander money on these overpriced chips and a lot of these developments that we don't know if eventually will pay off. Right, and there is another interesting question I would like to ask you. So we have seen a lot of tech development in China, but the question I have is, why should we in Taiwan and the rest of the world care about China's rise?
I believe the first is when US-China trade war started, no one could stay unaffected. And I think that's why Taiwan and the Western world need to pay attention of what's happening in China. And in some ways, China is actually more open to regulation around advanced technology. Many new technologies, like we just mentioned, eVTOLs, they are being adopted first in China.
They're more adventurous, let's say that.
Yeah, so I believe China's development will serve as an important benchmark for the rest of the world.
Right, it's like a window into the future, like what our future lives will look like.
Yeah.
Right. But then does it mean that sanctions don't work? Do we need to impose more overarching sanctions, or should we just give that idea up?
In the short term, we can say if it's effective, but in the long term, it might become a problem.
Okay, so I believe we should just keep an eye out for it and look forward to your next trip to China.
Like in 2035.
Maybe next year in 2025.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not wait 10 years for that. So thank you so much, Yixuan, for coming into our studio. I really enjoy our conversation. Thank you. So that wraps up today's episode. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to leave a review or shoot us an email. To read this in-depth report on the Made in China 2025 ambition and its hurdles, please visit CommonWealth English website to read Yixuan's story. Our next episode will be available November 12th. This show is produced and edited by Weiru Wang. I'm your host, Liu Kwangyin. Follow Taiwanology wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.